Hey everyone, we're live. So, as always, I'm your host, João, and I'm joined today by Carlo. Say hi, Carlo.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Carlo is on our ecosystem growth right now, and he's a great guy that has been part of basically everywhere in Cartesi since its creation. So, all areas, and he knows a little bit about everything. So, he's a great guy to be here talking to our illustrious guest of today, who is Jordan from Symbiotic. Hi, Jordan.
Hey guys,
how are you doing?
All good, thanks. Yeah, good to be here. I like the introduction. I was trying to figure out how many of those talks in person I was actually at. Yeah, it's cool. But anyway, yeah, good to be speaking on your podcast.
It's so nice to have you here, man. Just before we start with the conversation, just a heads up to the community, to everyone who's watching. We do have this engagement plan where we tend to ask for the community for questions. So sometimes we get some community questions at the end, and the best questions get a swag kit so they can bring home. So that's nice. Anyway, participate, send your questions. I hope we get some good ones, and Jordan might be able to answer them at the end, or me, or Carlo, whoever you want. So, Jordan, tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about Symbiotic, a little bit about what we'll be covering here in the podcast.
Sure thing. You started breaking up a little bit for me, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Yeah, so my background is, well, essentially I was a physicist to start with, actually. I'm a bit of a scientist at heart. It kind of came from wanting to truly understand how systems work, and I was a little bit sadistic. The more complex the system, the better. So yeah, I truly enjoyed studying the world of physics. But then after graduating, the next kind of focus for me was the world of finance. It kind of felt like finance was the main drive of how the world actually works, and so I kind of threw myself into that side of things. And yeah, it was definitely like a pretty crazy experience. Going from an undergrad to start working on a trading floor. But I quickly became, not quickly, but after numerous years, I came pretty disenfranchised with the system. It was pretty slow, it's pretty archaic. And ultimately, it kind of felt like a bit of a broken system that was like over-regulated and printing money to kind of just to keep the wheels turning. And the thing for me, like, okay, it's not obviously like crazy broken. It's still like it's very much dependent on the whole world. But for me, it kind of felt like there's people that are in power right now, and they're doing whatever they can to kind of remain and keep the status quo rather than innovating and changing and moving with the times. And so, yeah, I kind of, as I say, got a bit disenfranchised, and then this is kind of where my time in crypto was essentially born. I started working in ETH staking several years ago now, with the core goal of making sure that the Ethereum network was like as safe and secure as possible. And then now I kind of feel like I've moved on to my like final boss mission, so to speak, where it's not just Ethereum security I'm looking at or focusing on, but it's literally the security of anything that launches using blockchain infrastructure and kind of ensuring that it launches in a decentralized manner. And that is essentially where Symbiotic comes in and kind of where we are today.
Man, this is impressive. Like, I had no idea you had a background in physics, and at some point you actually studied. So, how exactly was transitioning like from physics to finance?
It was interesting. I felt like physics had its own complexity. I love the math side of things. As I said, like the more complex, the better. So, to start with, I kind of. I didn't find finance too much of a challenge. Like on the grand scheme of things, like the maths behind it is pretty simple, but there are pockets of the world that were very interesting. Like, a lot of the options trading, which I was doing, kind of got pretty complex pretty quickly. So I definitely kind of scratched my itch there in that world of finance. So it was cool. But yeah, like I said, didn't last too long. I think I was there for about 4 years in finance before kind of making the move to crypto.
There is the puzzle solving element right there. That's what you actually like.
He wants to secure the entire Web3 world, man.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
It's hard to find a puzzle bigger than that.
Sure.
For sure.
So anyway, you started, so you went from physics to banking afterwards, and what is the difference between banking and traditional finance, right? Like, what does your background from physics, from finance, helped in transactioning, even to Web3 afterwards? Practices, things you did in your traditional experience and you do now.
Yeah, I think like having the experience with like financial concepts and economics is generally pretty helpful in the space. Like the idea of crypto, it's often oriented around the idea of moneyness and having tokens as financial assets. So that was definitely like a benefit. I think the world of finance kind of helped me. I was doing sales, so going from a physicist to sales was kind of a bit of a stretch. So it was quite nice to hone my social skills a little bit more in the world of finance, doing sales. And actually, I think that's something that's quite interesting and very useful. Now, not necessarily the social skills, but like having the experience of working in like a professional environment, like knowing how to communicate effectively, that's kind of constructive and conducive to growth. And that's a really important piece that I'm now bringing into crypto. You know, I'm not not fresh out of school trying to figure things out. There's a bit of experience there that can kind of help me navigate the world of crypto.
I see.
Cool. And about Symbiotic and its modular and flexible security mission, can you speak about that a little?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I mentioned, the kind of goal for Symbiotic is like decentralize everything, right? The Symbiotic itself is a permissionless security framework. So it enables any product, any network, any protocol to build their own decentralized and optimized security kind of out of the box. If every network or every protocol in this space launched in a centralized manner, we'll be in a no better position than kind of the days pre-crypto. And like whilst there are kind of pockets of the ecosystem that are very decentralized, like the Bitcoin network and like Ethereum also kind of can fit into that category, like a hell of a lot of it isn't. And it's a systematic risk. You know, the more and more of the vital base layer infrastructure that is centralized, the more that systematic risk is apparent. You know, literally none of us here would have a job if Bitcoin could be turned off with a switch. You know, the US tried it, China tried it. And so we need to make sure as much of that core infrastructure that we're building on is as decentralized as possible. And so, yeah, that is the mission. Like we want to make it absolutely unjustifiable for anything to launch in a centralized manner. And how are we doing that? We're basically making sure that the barriers to entry for decentralization are as low as possible. We want to make it as easy and as efficient and ultimately as modular as possible to attach decentralized security to any solution. At the end of the day, like Symbiotic is a very thin infrastructure layer, and it enforces the economic security rules set by each of the networks that build on top of our solution. It has like 3 core pillars. It has the stake providers. They're the ones that actually provide the capital for security. It has node operators. These entities run the bespoke software effectively that is required for these networks. And the networks themselves, also known as AVSs in the space, they are the protocols, they are the solutions, the businesses that are consuming this economic security and providing a service ultimately. And so Symbiotic allows each of these entities to coordinate safely and without trust assumptions. And yeah, so the whole idea is giving these networks the tools to build their optimal security. And because Symbiotic is modular in nature, it means that each of these networks can have very different, very bespoke security to kind of satisfy the individual needs. And so, you know, we work with everything from like brand new networks who need security, like to help bootstrap security from day one, all the way to protocols that have been running for many years now, but there are parts of their tech stack which are centralized and need decentralizing, and that is essentially where we come in. And this is actually, and we can effectively work with anybody. It's a really fascinating place to be in the industry, where you can kind of every new project to see, I'm like, hey, we should probably speak to them because we could probably do X, Y, and Z. And this is kind of where I think the Cartesi Symbiotic relationship is very powerful, because just like on Symbiotic, anything can be built on top of our economic security. It's very similar to kind of the position that you guys sit in, where anything can be built on top of your VM or your coprocessor. So yeah, the opportunities are endless, so to speak. It sounds a little bit cliche, but I think it really is true in this case.
No, I agree. It's good to be flexible, right? It's good to have that feeling that you can do whatever you want, and you're enabling everyone. You're not restricting businesses, or you're not restricting anyone about anything. It just feels nice.
Yeah, and something that's super important is, especially when you have epic chains, it's really hard to get the critical mass to achieve security, right? So just having this protocol that instantly brings this security because it has a lot of stake involved, that's a great advantage for bootstrapping these new applications.
Dude,
Right, exactly. Like that is one of the hardest things. Sorry, go on, John.
Sorry, no. It's just that I get curious, like reading Symbiotic's documentation, understanding what the whole protocol does. Can you describe what is the role of restaking on Symbiotic's model? Like, what does restaking bring to the ecosystem? And how is it different also from what other protocols that do restaking do as well?
Right. So yeah, so restaking is it's just a really important tool to kind of make this decentralization like economically viable. And I just want to kind of clarify the kind of the terminology a bit here, at least how I see it in my eyes. So when you mean restaking, it means that you have an asset that has already been used for some base function. It might be staking in governance. It could be staking for security, like an ETH LST, for example. You then are able to then use this token again for economic security within Symbiotic. And why is this important? Because it provides extra utility to these tokens and extra yield over and above the kind of the token's core function. Whilst obviously the token itself still has a core economic value and function itself. The idea of restaking can also mean the idea of like sharing security, where you have a token that is restaked into Symbiotic, but then that security or that token, the economic value is used across multiple systems, multiple networks. And this is kind of the idea of shared security. And so why is this important? Is it because it allows networks kind of, one, utilize their own assets for their security without having to provide like crazy high yields on top. What I mean by this is that these assets will have a base function. Maybe it's for governance, maybe it's for other things. And for example, ETH LSTs, they will have a base yield. And as a network, you don't need to provide, well, this is kind of a space that remains to be seen. But the idea is that the yield boost you need to provide on these kind of high quality assets is going to be much less than what is required for if you wanted to completely bootstrap your own network from day one using your own token, right? And this is the idea where it becomes the hardest thing for these networks is the cold start problem. Getting that decentralized node operated network, getting that security from day one. And so having these assets which are already within our system that already have a base yield that you can borrow for, in theory, like a relatively low cost. That is kind of where the restaking comes in. And specifically on the shared security side, this is where decentralization can get it even cheaper. And what I mean by this is that you have networks that can share security across multiple networks. What this means is that as a network, you're not having to provide like all the incentives to just one set of capital. That set of capital will be receiving incentives from multiple sources, and so it can even reduce the cost further for networks. There are definitely trade-offs here to pay attention to. Like if you have security which is shared across a massive amount of networks, and there is slashing risks and risks that security can disappear very quickly. So there's a balance to be made here. As a network, you don't want to be leveraging up and sharing security across too many networks. But at the same time, it is very, very possible to kind of create a framework where you share security across some hand-picked networks and in a system which is safe and secure for like everybody in that solution. And so when you do this, the risk reward of shared security really moves towards in favor of these networks, giving them that really cost-effective economic security, whilst also having, knowing that security is going to be there when they need it.
So basically, you can think about balancing what your application needs, right? So if you have a game or something that has low stakes, you can be more aggressive, share with more protocols, and take a higher risk. But if you have like a financial application or something, you want to be less aggressive and share with less people because you want a higher guarantee that that stake is going to be there, right?
Right. That's certainly one way to think about it. Yeah, and there are like guardrails we have on our side to kind of make sure that these security systems or these shared security systems remain safe. And so one of the things that we have on Symbiotic are called resolvers. These resolvers are effectively like veto committees. They can veto and even change how a slashing penalty is implemented. And so like resolvers can be anything from like an EOA, it can be a multisig, it could be even like DAO governance. And both the networks and the providers of the state capital have to approve the resolvers for that capital. And so like these resolvers are very much like training wheels. When networks are new, they're going to make mistakes. The operators, like there might be bugs in the clients, the operators might mess up. And you don't want to jeopardize the network getting off the ground because there is an accidental slashing. And so these resolvers allow for these mistakes to be rectified without cost. And then over time, when the network matures, you can either decentralize the resolvers further or remove them completely so that that you have a system which is running, that is mature, and future slashings, fingers crossed, are only there due to real mistakes, and they are legitimate slashings. And so that resolver piece is really interesting to kind of reduce the risks for these networks. But the other piece is like decentralization. It's word on the mind. It's just diversification, right? So a network should be getting their security from a range of different stake providers, a range of different assets, using a range of different node operators, and even they could even be across a range of different shared security structures. So what I mean by this is like you can have a network that gets a third of their security within a shared structure between like networks A, B, and C. Another third could be between networks A, D, and E, and another third from another shared security structure. So even though there is shared security going on, you can still decentralize and diversify that risk so that the chances of just kind of getting your security blown out by the misbehavior of another network is slim / non-existent, and that's where the balance can really shift again to favor shared security for networks.
But then this is something I haven't quite gotten a grasp of while reading the docs. Can you restake between multiple protocols or multiple shared security networks at the same time? Like, I understand the idea of you staking to that shared security network, and then using the assets inside the dApps that are in there. But can you do that to multiple shared security networks?
Right. So essentially, yeah. So what you could have is, so in Symbiotic, you have this structure called vaults. This is when I've been talking about stake providers. These are basically, or where the capital is held within Symbiotic, they're held within vaults. And so a vault will have, let's say, $100 million of capital within their solution that can be delegated to various networks. And yes, you can have it so that, let's say, that $100 million is delegated to, let's say, 3 different networks all at the same time. And so that is where like the element of kind of shared security really comes in. As I mentioned though, the safest way to kind of do this is to make sure that the networks themselves are not receiving all of their economic security from that single vault. And so that is where they might only take, let's say, $25 million or $50 million from that vault and the $50 million from somewhere else. And so whilst these individual vaults can be sharing security across multiple protocols, the networks themselves are actually getting the security from multiple different vaults. So it's going to be I expect it to be like a very complex ecosystem where if you actually drew like a spider diagram of where all these networks are getting their security, it's going to be very, very chaotic. But at the same time, like it's a really important piece to make sure that this kind of shared security ecosystem remains safe.
I see.
And this is really cool, right? So if you think about using Symbiotic with Cartesi, in Cartesi, basically every application is a different chain, right? It's what called an app chain today. And then, as I was saying before, it's really hard for you to bootstrap your app chain. One, because you need people to run the nodes. And second, because, okay, I have a new application. How do I secure it? It's really hard to get to that critical mass, to have enough users, people just putting the resources in there, interested on that brand new game you made, or that new analysis that you're doing on Python, or all the stuff, right? And then if you combine it with Symbiotic, it's really cool because, you got this huge network with a lot of vaults, a lot of value in there, just ready to secure your application, right? So that's really cool. And how do you? Yeah. So
Sorry.
how do you see this happening? Which kind of applications do you think will benefit the most out of this? It's literally a symbiotic relationship, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah, it is, because you have the stakers. They have these effectively dormant assets that they want to provide, get a yield on. So they are the ones who are ultimately taking the risk, but obviously get the reward from that. You have like node operators. Their business is running node infrastructure, and they are specialists at doing that. And obviously they get rewarded for doing that as well. And then finally, you have, just to your point earlier, you have these networks that, especially the new networks, who getting bootstrapped and getting up to critical mass is incredibly difficult. And so, you have these business owners that have, spent hours and hours developing this solution, and that could be like, it could be ingenious. It could be, like a game-changing and world-changing platform, but it could fail to actually reach mass adoption because it fails to actually bootstrap security. And so these guys, I'd say networks are actually the main benefit of kind of this whole architecture, right? They are the ones who, the risk of their launch risk is dramatically reduced by being able to kind of bootstrap themselves with an ecosystem like Symbiotic. And then it's not just their launch risk, but then as the users and in years later, even after their launch, the users of that platform know that the security that is backing that platform is decentralized, and it's there. And so it just makes the whole ecosystem system safer effectively.
Are there solutions which you think Symbiotic can? Are there cases where you think Symbiotic can enable cross communication between different apps and more of a that have different characteristics than the simplest ones, such as rollups, for example, app chains? How do you see that happening?
Yeah. So this is quite a topical piece. I think the ETH ecosystem is a really good example of how there's a lot of fragmentation, just by the nature of how the ecosystem has grown, leaning towards like L2s to kind of make the space cheaper and more efficient. And so that L2 infrastructure is certainly something which is kind of a priority to decentralize. So like decentralizing sequencers is certainly one piece. Like fast fidelity is another kind of key element, which can come in with these L2s, but also interoperability. Like to your point, the ability, not just L2s, but for any rollup, any chain to safely message and send assets is becoming more and more vital as there's more and more chains that kind of crop up. And so that is exactly kind of where Symbiotic comes in. The way to think about Symbiotic is there are kind of like two key components. You have this decentralized node operated network and the economic capital backing it. And so it becomes very easy to have a system which is centralized, like a bridge, for example, where there is maybe just one entity providing all the interop effectively. You can now remove that one entity, plug in that decentralized node operated network. And then second, not only do you provide that node network, but you can also layer on the economic capital to kind of make sure that those node operators act responsibly. And that action responsibility could be related to like liveness. Are they performing their job in the time frame which they have promised. It could also be to do with correctness. Like, are they doing their job as they have promised? Like, have they correctly messaged cross-chain or sent tokens cross-chain? And all of this now becomes enforceable in like a very trustless manner. So yeah, it's a really powerful tool. And yeah, the ETH L2 ecosystem, but also just different rollups that are launching through Cartesi, that being able to interop effectively and safely is going to be a really key piece, especially if we continue down the path like we are at the moment with this more and more fragmentation. And it doesn't have fragmentation is not necessarily the bad thing if you do have those safe connections across chain, and that's kind of where we can come in.
I see. I love that you mentioned fast finality in here, because it's a solution we discuss a lot in Cartesi for something that it would be really good for us. As in,
right.
Optimistic rollups do have the finality time, which is a drawback, but having this fast finality would allow us to do other things. There is even this initiative that is the coprocessor that's happening on Cartesi right now. Carlo can definitely explain it better than I can, but the idea is doing a lambda, right? Delegating some part of the computing. Do you want to get into it, Carlo? Maybe?
Yeah, I can. So traditionally on Cartesi, we have more of this roll-up model. So basically, your application keeps state. You make a transition from the current state to another one by receiving inputs using data that received through Ethereum or another base layer. And from time to time, you do this checkpoint. Everybody on that app chain is going to say, "Hey, I agree with this," or "No, I dispute," and then we get on our fraud-proof system and stuff. But that's really slow, and sometimes you just don't want to do your entire application inside of Cartesi. You just want to use the Linux superpower for a specific function. So that's where the coprocessor is really great. So what the coprocessor does is, okay, so I have this call to, let's say, a computational oracle. It will just compute this really super complex stuff, and it's going to get back to me on my smart contract. And one great way to secure it, for instance, is with restaking, because then you can have this response coming back like real fast, and you can do a crazy amount of stuff with that. So we've all seen this plethora of attacks on these lending protocols and stuff, right? And a lot of times it's because, well, the tools that they have to approve a loan is just too simple. But if you think about the coprocessor, you can just pick up this really complex analysis that you generally do on traditional finance, and you say, "Hey, coprocessor, go there, do this really complex computation that's going to take like hundreds of billions of CPU cycles, and get back to me." And then you just don't get so much risk from a flash loan or something like this, because you did some very complex logic to analyze it, right? So that's the basic idea of coprocessor. And how do you think this will enable like more security, more complex applications and stuff on traditional smart contract applications?
Right, for sure. Because, like, to your point, we can only rely so much on the blockchain infrastructure to kind of facilitate these complex computations. And that's the same reason why we've migrated to L2s on the ETH side, because we need to take things off chain effectively to handle things to scale properly. And so this is exactly obviously what you've just explained, where the coprocessor comes in. Where Symbiotic can come in here is that coprocessor still needs to relay information on chain. And ultimately, that information needs to be verified, or the network itself needs to approve that information. And this is the idea where like fast finality comes in, specifically on optimistic rollups. Rather than waiting for 7 days for that information to be effectively finalized, to be crystallized on chain, you can reduce that finality window to even down to like hours. The way this works is, well, the key thing about optimistic proofs is that they are proposed to like the parent network as valid, right? You then have the period where that proof can be disputed, and as I mentioned, is currently 7 days. But let's say you have an entity that is 100% trusted, And that entity can come in before that 7-day period and say, I've checked this block and it is correct. The state of this L2, the state that was provided by this rollup is correct. I will, and if that entity was 100% trusted, then finality can happen as soon as they provide that attestation. So how do you get that trusted entity? Well, you can do that with restaking. And that trusted entity, it could be a single node operator that is willing to put in like a bunch of capital behind their decision, saying, I validate this block, I attest that it is correct, it will finalize. Here is a bunch of capital which I stake. And if anything goes wrong, if I lied, or if the block fails to finalize, then you are able to take this capital, right? That is one possibility or one instance. The best way to do this, though, is rather than just a single node operator, it is having a whole group of node operators performing that node operator network that are providing those attestations. And then you will have that capital that's like layered on from like a restaking platform like Symbiotic that can backstop the decisions. So we're effectively creating like a trusted entity that can attest for the completeness and correctness of blocks to provide that fast finality. We're creating that trusted entity using a decentralized node operated network and capital at stake. And again, you will notice it's the exact same idea as anything, right? You have that node operated network, you have that capital at stake. The fast finality is just one example of what can be done, but the possibilities are that there's that framework can remove any centralized trusted entity and fix and decentralize the whole system, basically.
So it's essentially working as a liquidity provider. What the person is doing is acting as someone who puts themselves as liable for the functioning of the correctness of the application. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
This I can immediately think of two great use cases for this. One is Rives, which Carlo worked on and developed, which is our gaming platform. That would work marvelously for fast finality on gameplays. So you can, I can clearly see this narrative both for Cartesi rollups and coprocessor. You beating a game, you doing something, you getting your item, and instantly being able to get your item. And also for another use case that we love here in Cartesi, that's DCA Monster, which is an automated market maker that you have like very, very small granularity. So you need Cartesi to be able to run it, but then you would have the whole problem of slowness in terms of finality, which I think this kind of solves. So I would really like to know from the two of you, like applications that you think that are cool that could come with this combination, or even not necessarily with Cartesi, with Symbiotic as a whole, things that you are excited to see that you think are enabled by this.
Sure thing. Carlos, did you want to start? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So as João was saying, Rives is one of the things that I'm very excited to integrate something like this. Because in Rives, we have a lot of stuff that demands finality for you to actually do something. So let's say you played a game, you got this marvelous item. Oh, how do you sell it? You need to wait for finality, right? And you might want to buy another item before to go on a different quest. Like you already have that marvelous shield that you got. You need a special sword. And that adds frustration to the user, right? Why the hell do I have to wait like 7 days or something to sell for something that I have now? And then I will have to wait a week for playing with this with these things I got on a different game and stuff like this. And if you think about fast finality, then it's good because, I got this item here, I can port it to another game and just use it like really fast. I don't have to wait a week or anything for it. It adds a lot of dynamic that people expect because of their experience on Web2 gaming, right? And that's something that helps a lot on board these Web2 players, Web3. Addresses one of the main frustrations they have right now. And that's just on gaming, but on finance specifically, I think that's a superpower because if you think about the specific DEXs that you can do inside a rollup or anything like that, one of the main problems is that, well, you lose liquidity. You put an asset in there, you negotiate whatever. If there's some new application that's pumping and it's hot, you cannot just pick up your assets and move there because finality is too slow. But once again, you pick up the risk-taking mechanism, you make this fast finality actually fast, right? You don't have to wait a week and then that market is no longer hot or anything like that. You just remove your assets from there and put on the desired application and instantly start to do that. So I think that this liquidity factor that fast finality brings is like crucial for onboarding traditional Web 2 experience on Web 3 and doing that in a safe way, as you explained, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And like, it's definitely key when you have these, when the capital's at risk, like DCA Monster, for example, there is, potentially significant amount of funds that are at risk there. And that is very much important where fast finality comes in, as you mentioned, but also, as you also mentioned, ensuring that the UX for like a gaming platform is on par with Web 2. Like, we will never win this battle between Web 2, Web 3 if the UX of Web 3 has been previously, right? It's a bit sucky. Let's be fair. And so, yeah, it's just another one of the pieces of the puzzle. But there's more to it. Like, fast finality is just one element. Take Reeves, for example. There could be a system that actually verifies that the gamers complete certain actions in order to get their reward, especially when these rewards could have monetary value as well. I think I used to be a big gamer myself, so this is the whole intersection between Web3 and gaming is kind of very interesting to me as well. So but skins, for example, on various games like Counter-Strike, they can have significant monetary value. And so ensuring there is a system that is verifiable, that some centralized entity does not control who gets rewarded, or you want to make sure that this, when there is like potentially a large amount of capital at risk, to make sure that there's a fair system for everybody. And that is something where restaking comes in, or even like ensuring that games have a decentralized servers so that they are not reliant on a single server to maintain access to their game. Gamers put in hours and hours and hours to build up their game profile. And potentially building up a lot of economic wealth in that game. And so, having a decentralized node network can make sure the game continues running. And you could even have a model where, like, if the economic security model for that game is sustainable, where it encourages node operator participation, then you can actually have like the game developers could be long gone, but the game can continue running because you have a sustainable business model for node operators and for the gamers themselves. Obviously, as long as people are willing to play the game, that model is going to continue. So yeah, it's more than just fast finality. And we are working with a complete range of different protocols, like interoperability protocols, Oracle providers, pre-confirmations, data availability. Like, there are so many verticals that are kind of tapping into restaking right now. It's almost one of the most exciting parts about it. Is like, as I mentioned before, every kind of new project I see, I look into their, just get at a high level of the project. I'm like, we could probably work with you. Let's chat. And so, yeah, it means that we have a pretty wide ecosystem that we're talking to, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys as well.
Dude, I love that you mentioned how it's not only just about fast finality. I think that helps us to get a big vision of everything, a little bit of everything that Symbiotic does. I keep thinking it's amazing in the set of interoperability. I get in an asset and being able to use it in different places. If I have an NFT that I can apply and use in many different app chain games or things like that, it unlocks just so much. It kind of gives me the vibe of a fully interconnected ecosystem and not just application, self-contained application, right? I think it's beautiful. Yeah. Just wanted to mention that. And I think we can move actually to our rapid fire session, which I'm going to throw at you some questions real fast. And
okay.
Yeah, try to answer them with like a word, a phrase at most, but really fast back and forth, right? You ready for this?
Okay.
Okay, so first thing.
Yeah.
I need you to tell me one blockchain or tech myth you wish people would stop believing in.
That crypto is decentralized. We can do a lot better.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Probably teleportation.
Who's one person in the blockchain space you would love to meet?
Oh, come on. It's got to be Satoshi, right? Dead or alive? I guess so.
One person that really inspires you. It can be on Web3 or not.
I'll go with the person who got me into Web3, which is actually Tim Ferriss.
And which is your favorite Web3 project?
Ooh, I mean, come on. I gotta say Symbiotic there for sure.
Yeah,
but besides Symbiotic,
that's not a fluffy bullshit answer. That is, I wouldn't be working here if I didn't believe in what we can achieve. So, yeah,
that's fair. Besides Symbiotic, is there anyone specific one?
I'm a big fan of what Optimism's doing. I think they've had a lot of success. They're doing things right. So yeah, kind of keen to see where they go.
What's your favorite Web3 buzzword?
My favorite Web3 what? Sorry.
Buzzword.
It's got to be like ZK. The tech's fantastic. It's an overused word, but the tech is fantastic.
And your least favorite one?
Probably right now is AI. Again, the tech is fantastic, but it's just way overused.
I agree.
AI.
Totally agree. Now, one last question.
Just put AI in you can get funding. Sorry, go on.
Exactly. Exactly. One last question. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yeah, let's do it.
How do you feel about that, Carlo?
I feel there's no question here. There's only one clear answer as an Italian. So, yeah.
Hey, I'm married to an Italian, so yeah, she's probably not very happy with me right now. But at least I was married.
You're gonna have troubles when you're back home, man.
I've been divorced. To be honest, I haven't had it. It's one of those things I used to have as a kid, and I haven't had it as an adult. So maybe I need to try it again sometime, and then I'll get back to you, see whether I regret that answer or not.
I think it's good. I think the mix between sweet and salty, it gets interesting. I'm not saying I always have it or I like it, but it's interesting. It's something there that's different.
Right.
I mean, I come from Brazil, and there people have some pizza crimes. There's this whole Reddit page called Pizza Crimes where you have things like sushi on pizza, which are just crazy for me.
I saw this restaurant in Italy that actually made something clever. So they did offer Pizza Hawaii. But the point is, all their pizzas were like 10 euros, 12 euros, and Pizza Hawaii was like 200 euros. So you want to do something profane, you got to pay for it.
Oh, I like that. Okay. Nice.
That's an interesting one. Dude, Jordan, I would like to know a little bit more about how you act specifically on Symbiotic, right? As a BD. What's the role of a BD in this ecosystem? How do you see the other BDs working against what you do? How is the dynamic?
Right. Yeah, I think the title is not irrelevant, but BD on the Symbiotic side at least is very much a blend of like BD, ecosystem, growth, a bit of strategy, mainly because we're still a very small team. But yeah, I think on our side, the product can be quite complex, and the use cases of the product are, for example, when I first speak to a company, to a protocol, the way I approach things is they have to tell me, well, not they don't have to tell me first, but like it's much better if they tell me first what their architecture is, like how are they built, so then I can very much apply what Symbiotic can do to them. If I first gave an introduction to Symbiotic to every protocol I spoke to, then that's introduction would be so generic. It would be very hard necessarily for these projects to kind of relate how we can work together. And so I think that's one of the key pieces for how to like approach BD on our side is we very much need to understand what the problems are or what the problem areas are for these networks. And then we can say, okay, well, this is where we can help. We can help in X, Y, and Z. Different ways, and yeah, on our side, I guess similar to other like BDs, we have as I mentioned, we kind of have these three pillars. We have stake providers, node operators, and networks. And our job is to kind of maximize the number of each of those entities within our ecosystem, manage their relationship, make sure they have all the tools they need to kind of get onboarded to Symbiotic and get set up. So that's kind of, what the role entails and kind of how I approach the role.
I see. All right, man. I think that wraps up most of my questions. So I want to get to know a little bit more about you personally. Like, what are the things that get you most excited about in the ecosystem right now?
Right. I honestly think, very much in the light of the US election, that I'm excited about getting some more regulatory clarity. It sounds a bit sad, but this ecosystem has been it's not been a fair market. I believe in fair markets, and we have not had a fair stab at making it mainstream and actually disrupting the norms, what everyone's been used to for the past 100 odd years. And a lot of that has come down to regulatory scrutiny, specifically in the US. Now, I'm not saying I endorse Trump or what have you, but I think their stance on crypto is going to let us kind of spread our wings. Let's see what we can do, right? In a fair market, let's see whether we can actually make crypto succeed. And I think now we have that. We will not necessarily instantly overnight, but we're going to start getting a bit more regulatory clarity, and it just feels like a massive weight is kind of lifted off the ecosystem. So yeah, I'm excited to see how projects change and adapt and position themselves now. They haven't got the scrutiny that we had in the past. And just to be very clear here, I am all for regulation. It is a very necessary part of the ecosystem. However, it has just been regulation for the sake of trying to dampen and ultimately make crypto disappear. That is not.
I think Jordan froze.
Yeah.
Real quick. Yeah.
But I got what he says. It's like a witch hunt, right? So you killed someone, you must be a witch, and then kill you instead of just picking up the bad guys in the ecosystem. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure how this is going to turn out to be. I know most of the propositions of what are being talked on right now, but it still feels to me so unpredictable in some way or another. How do you deal with this unprediction?
But that's the point. You gotta have some regulation because in crypto there's a lot of money, there's a lot of power. So unfortunately, you also get scammers and people doing things they shouldn't. But on the other hand, it's a blooming industry that can revolutionize the entire economy, governments, everything, right? So you must give it room to breathe and stimulate it enough so that it can reach its full potential. So it's a balance, right?
Yeah, I get it. It makes sense. Well, and what I find interesting is that there is a tendency of people, at least in the West, following a lot what happens in the US, right? So let's see what will unlock in this next few years, and how everything is going to be also in South America, in Europe, or anything. Let me just check with Jordan if he can come back.
I think we unfortunately lost him. Probably some internet issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a nice talk, right?
Yeah. Let me just allow him back so he can finish his thought, and we can wrap up and say goodbye to him.
Cool.
I think he's in Nida. Can you check if he's in the? Alrighty. Okay. So, guys, okay, he's in the studio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you are.
I said at the start off air that I'm currently in Thailand and my internet is a bit dodgy. I really hope that it lasts. And clearly we got to about 45 minutes and it failed on me. So apologies. I didn't know how far you got. I ended up ranting a little bit about things. So actually, it's probably best that it wasn't on air. But yeah, I don't know how much of your answer, my answer you heard.
No, I mean, I think when you dropped, you were talking about how you feel that you are actually pro-regulation at some point.
Right.
But
not against this witch hunt, which just deliberately wanted to end the crypto industry.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't have said it better than myself. So yeah, there you go.
Perfect. That's really nice, Jordan. Thank you so much for coming, man. This was a blast. We got one question actually from community. If you feel good to answer it, it was from our only chat. The question is, how does symbiotic permissionless risk-taking approach ensure that slashing risks and effect remain isolated across different chains and vaults? So,
right. Yeah. So this is, as I mentioned, how the kind of the resolvers. Well, there's two parts. There's a core mechanism within Symbiotic called resolvers. These are the ones that can arbitrate slashing risks. These are the ones that can make sure that like accidental slashing is like vetoed. These entities, as I mentioned, can be like multi-sigs. They can be, they ultimately can be any kind of entity that can give an on-chain signature to say yes slash or no don't. So they're very much important to make sure that, especially new networks, but also when you have this shared security framework, that a slashing offense will not cause like a cataclysmic event and knockout security for loads of networks. So that's kind of a core function within the Symbiotic itself. Something that isn't necessarily a feature of Symbiotic, but something which is just encouraged with all the networks we talk to is as I mentioned, like diversity. If a network diversifies their stake across different vaults, different assets, it means that if there is a slashing offense, they could maybe only lose like 10% of their security because it's just slashing one certain asset from one certain vault. And then when you have like shared security, it means that even though there has been a slashing event, because the security from the networks is diversified, it means they've still got plenty of security from other places. And so, yeah, having that resolvers piece is really key. But also there's just the diversity of stake. Make sure that you can't intentionally silo the.
I think
we lost you for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, we lost a few seconds.
No worries, man.
But I think that was it.
Yeah, I think it was. I think we got to understand the whole.
Resolvers plus the old rule of not putting your eggs all in the same basket.
Exactly. I think I should just like send Carlos answers, and he'll just give them one sentence answers that are just perfectly. That's another one.
You do get a lot of details that are super cool, man. So yeah.
Man, this was awesome, Jordan. Thank you so much for coming. We had a blast talking about like you, understanding a little bit about your background, what you do as a BD, what Symbiotic does. At least for me, it was very enlightening. Thank you for coming.
And I super want to see all the stuff that we can do together, and all the applications that will be secured by your risk-taking.
For sure, I'm excited what we can build there. Let's make it happen. And yeah, thanks for having me on. Anytime.
All right, guys.
Pleasure, man.
For another second, then. So I think we should end it.
All right. So that was a builder 4 a.m. Keep building and pioneering the world of Web3. Bye bye.